Welcome to What's Going On Here. Bob Venn with Peg Barcomb. This is a continuation of a program we had, the first part of the memorabilia of Rouses Point, New York. And we ended at that time, Peg, just a few minutes ago while we were doing this here, so we're still dressed the way we were before. We were looking at John Lovell and Son building down on Montgomery and Rose Avenue, you said, an area. And we're going to show you then what happened. Or I'm going to listen while Peg tells you, because so much this is new to me too. I thought I knew a lot about these things, but you've never showed me these things before, Peg. We've heard, we hope you've enjoyed the first part, and we may be getting 3 different parts of this. We'll be doing some more pictures today, and then another time we're going to be another segment of memorabilia and maybe some more pictures, whatever. And thanks for watching.
Well, we covered the sewing machine factory being in that building.
Right.
And then after the sewing machine factory, Plattsburgh gave the sewing machine factory better tax breaks, so they moved to Plattsburgh. They weren't here very long. Now, one of the men that worked in Lovell's was a Phillips. His wife had Phillips Hall later on. And him and a Casey, I don't know which Casey, opened another printing. They built up and started another printing building right where Shazy Hardware is on Lake Street. At that time, when they started that, that was called Canada Street. From the corner of Chapman down was Canada Street. Phillips and Casey built this printing place there, and then that burned. The picture you just showed and this one was the fire. So that they were out of business again. So they didn't, that was called Lakeside Press. They didn't have another printing press after that. They just decided 2 of them burned, that was enough.
Burned in 1912, according to the back of your picture?
All right, 1912. I know, I remember my mother saying that she had watched that when it burned.
Mm-hmm. A big loss.
So then, after this printing press, now that picture I'll tell you about before. In 1877, the village was incorporated. The first election was held in Eagle Hall. Now, it was a long time we didn't know where Eagle Hall had been or what it was. So Alec Dan, one day I was talking with Alec Dan, and he said, well, I know where Eagle Hall was. So he said, take me for a ride. So he got in my car, and I took him around. He said, go to Washington Avenue. I did, and when we got to the corner of Washington Avenue, he said, Eagle Hall sat right here. Well, he pointed to this building that you're looking at now. Now, that is the Kenyon Block. So he said, Eagle Hall was moved by the Westons when they were going to build this Kenyon Block. The Eagle Hall building was moved. It went up Washington Avenue. Alec Dan said he was a little boy and he watched them move it on rollers up Washington Avenue, and there was no Maple Street then. So after it got shortly past what is the post office today, they cut across from Washington Avenue over to Chapman Street and put that on the corner on a block. So today, after that, we called it Weston's Block because it was Weston's that moved it there. And that's the apartment house that is still there today on the corner of Chapman and Maple. So,
okay.
So that was
Yeah.
Eagle Hall. So then this building was the Kenyon Block, and that was built for a theater. Now, Henry Sayen had the first talkies in Rouses Point, and it was in that building. Now, that building today is Armand's 2, is in that building.
Oh, yes.
So that's what they did with that.
Now, way back when you were talking before, Peg, you mentioned that when Lakeside burned, there was no more printing, they didn't follow that up. Now, after that, talking about printing as part of your history, the North Countryman did some printing for other people.
That came in 1929.
Okay, and then they finally left Rouses Point. They'd been done out of Elizabethtown, and of course, that very good printer in Rouses Point now, the Rochesters and Border Press.
The North Countryman was started by the Ryans. Leslie and Ernest Ryan started that, and they kept that going for a long time as that they owned it. Then there was Kessler's that owned it, and Krause's, And so that stayed here a long while before it finally folded up here, and then they moved the offices to there. The last place they had their presses was in a building that is, if you were in the Grand Union parking lot, there's a building right there to the south. That
Yes.
was the last place where the North Countryman was printed.
Then Jackie Taylor had her ceramics after that. That's the same building?
She didn't have, yes, she did.
Yes?
Yes, she had her ceramics in there, and they took the presses out while she was there. Yes. And now, as you say, we have Border Press
and
with Jimmy Rochester.
We did a story on them. It was a very good story, very well prepared. They did an excellent job, and I stopped in there, and I marvel at that nice, clean business in Rouses Point. What a great place for the family to be working back
Well,
there.
this is a couple of the programs that showed at that theater, but you see this movie?
Story by Rufus King.
Now, Rufus King was a mystery writer in Rouses Point. We'll have a bit on him later. And this was one of his books that they made into a movie, and it played at the New Liberty Theater in Rouses Point.
And on the back of here, it says shown at on Sunday and Monday, October 7th and 8th, 1923. One of the biggest moving pictures of 1923-24, now running in New York City. Story written by Rufus King and Rouses Pointer at the New Liberty Theater. They plotted to blow up the Panama Canal.
And this was just another way their programs, sometimes they had colored, and they put the movies for the whole week. They listed them on the program.
I've never heard of the New Liberty Theater, Peg. I'm certainly learning a lot here this morning.
Well, I hesitate to say, I think it was Henry Saint. I know it was a Saint that run it, and I'm almost sure it was Henry that had that theater.
Mm-hmm. Some of the pictures were the face on the barroom floor, Barroom, Douglas MacLean in Chickens, The Exile, John Gilbert, the famous John Gilbert, The Rustle of Silk, and Grace Darman in A Dangerous Adventure, Priscilla Dean in The Flame of Life. Now we watch them at home in our TVs, and we rent them, right?
Now, 1860 to 1900, lumber was a big thing in Rouses Point. Now, the first one you put up is the Booth Lumber Company. Now, that was on, their docks went right over the water. That was down in the area of where the village offices are today. And that's where the Albert Chapman I told you about built the block. This is who he worked for. Now, this one on this side is the Millard Lumber Company. Now, what they did, the lumber came in by boat or train, and it was dressed here. They made it into boards or whatever. It came in as logs. And they made it into boards or box shocks or whatever they needed, and then it was shipped back out again. So the Booth didn't dress any of the lumber. They only shipped it from one to another. But the Millards did. They had a real big lumber business down at the end of Barnes Street, over in the area of the CN. They had big project going there, and they dressed the lumber, and they made box shocks. Box shocks were their biggest seller. Box shocks are a wooden box made and knocked down, and then they would be packed and shipped to the stores, and the stores would put them back together again. But that was their biggest thing that they did.
When you say Barnes, I remember way back, I didn't know where Barnes was. That's, again, way behind the Shazy Hardware across from the rec center.
You go on Lily Avenue, and it goes into Barnes.
Right.
So it's the two stores that
This
are there.
picture we've seen before when we were doing the railroad. Look at the people that worked at that. That's one that built up over the railroad track,
Yes.
right? Up and over?
That was Millard's, and they had 150 employees. And there's only one I know. I think I squared it off, but I don't know if you see it. It was Tom Gibo that was in there. And
Yes, he's the second person to the left of the post. As you look at the post, there's a square right around his face. That's Mr. Gibo.
but that was here for many years, and he built the anchorage, Mr. Millard built the anchorage for his home.
Isn't that a nostalgic picture?
And when he built it, this is what it looked like when he built it, before it was ever hotels. He built it like this, and they used to say that you could put a locomotive on the roof if you could have got it up there, and it would have held it. Because, of course, he had the best of lumber and everything, being in the lumber business. He had everything the best. And the lumber building stayed here till the old Mr. Millard died, and then his sons sold out, and they went back to New Hamburg, New York, away from here.
The only difference I see in the picture, Peg, as I look at it, is like a rail around the cupola here.
Yes,
that
yes.
wasn't there in the later years,
No,
was it? No, they took that down.
No.
But you look at this, it makes you realize what we don't have any longer, a real landmark in the village of Rouses Point.
And then, of course, it turned into the anchorage, and then that burned, and now we've got a brand new anchorage, which I still don't have a picture of the new one. I'm waiting till the grass and everything. Now, these are just menus and items that the anchorage put out. You see, you walk in a restaurant and you see something on a menu, at least I do, entails or anywhere, I'd ask for one and keep it, because you see now the anchorage is long gone. And these are things that were there at that time, and so we wouldn't have them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So those are just some things that I saved.
Back 2 years ago, Calvin, coming out of church the last day of the year, said, you feel like going for a ride today? And we got in his car. We were out 3 or 4 hours riding around the North Country here up in the town of Champlain. He took both sides of most of the roads just to see what was there and what wasn't there, because some had burned since, the anchorage burned since, and then what has been built on a vacant lot. And it's history. He's never shown it. He figures sometime, whenever he doesn't have something to show, but that don't come up very often. There's always something to show, and now he's getting into his memories.
And the video, of course, we all done a video on the anchorage,
yes,
which is still
yes,
available.
Yep.
The starting of it, the
Yes.
starting of the new one, and the history of it.
Yep.
So I'm not going into too much of that, because we've already got that video on that if people want to see it.
Right.
So.
And then I want to remind you that any of these shows, and we've done now on what's going on here, about 100. We're just into our second 100. And those are available if you want a copy of any of those for your home records, just to see again, whatever. They're available from Calvin, and I think you can get them for $15. You can get one that maybe that had you in it, maybe something, a place where the anchorage, where you might have got married or something like that, and you'd like to have it. And the story of the anchorage with Peg and I way back, and you can get those from Calvin. They're available. He's got copies of everything he's ever taken. And if there's anything that you'd like to see or to have, contact him, and it's nominal fee of $15. You'll get a copy right off the original, and you can have it, and you can watch it to your heart's content. Peg, she can watch me over and over and over again now when she gets copies of these. Go ahead, Peg. No, we're back to churches.
Now, this is the Presbyterian church. Well, Rouses Point had lots of churches. We had a Baptist church, which there's no pictures, but that was the very first, when they were starting up, there was a Baptist church.
Where was that?
And I don't know.
There was
but in
one.
the history, there was a Baptist church. And it told who the parishioners were, the families belonged to it and all, but we don't have a picture of it. But this is the Presbyterian church, which is on Washington Avenue. Now, that church partly burned in 1904, and it was rebuilt. Now, in that church, the first baby that was baptized was born on a train. And they brought the baby there, and it was baptized. Now, that picture is just a dedication of the hall in 1962. It was the program. Again, that's just something you toss out, but I saved it.
The interior?
Yeah, that was the dedication of the hall.
Talk about interior. That's a beautiful interior in that church, and a nice basement where they have their dinners. And Reverend Wu's been here for 30 plus years, huh? And we're all indebted to Reverend Wu, who is a very great person to have in your community.
Now, this is our library. It opened in 1906, and it opened with 3,455 books. And most of them were donated. They had a drive, and they went around the whole village and asked if people had books that they would give. and that's how many books they started with. Dr. L.C. Dodds left some money to build a library. Then the village had a meeting and they voted. They decided to put it on the ballot, and they voted if the village would spend up to $1,500 more to build the library. And 53 voted for it and 45 voted against it. But they got the library. So the library was there and it was opened.
They also found out during the famous cannon issue in Rouses Point that the village does not control the land, and that's by a board. Is that right?
The village owns the library, such as it owns the fire department. They have their own set of officers, but the actual property and contents really belongs to the village. We've had controversy over that before. If it's brought right down to law, the village owns it. But they have a governing body for the library who runs it. Betty Miro is their president. Arthur Trombley is on the board, and so they run it themselves, but they are really part of the village. Now this is what the library looked like when it was built. Now that was Water Street, which is Lake Street, but this gives you an idea of what the street looked like at that time. And you see the little Episcopal church.
Yeah, and without the big funeral home building, it was not there. If you'll notice,
that wasn't there.
Over to the, I guess that'd be on your left, I'm looking at it backwards here, that's Pearls, that's White Street. Huh?
White Avenue.
White Avenue right there did not have that big building on the corner. So this was taken a number of years ago.
Now this is the Thompson store. That is Meyer's new place today. But when this was the Thompson store, during the Fenian raids, they thought the Fenians were coming over here, and so they gathered ammunition and they stored it right among the stock in the store to be prepared, because they thought this store would hold up the way it was built. And if the raiders came over here, well, they would at least have something to go by. So all the ammunition was stored in that store.
So this is right across the road from the Holland Hotel and where the Ben Franklin was.
Yes. So then after Thompson had it, the Bowron family got a hold of it, and they remodeled it all over like it looked up until Myers took it. And they had, after they remodeled it, he had a feed store in there, and it was almost, you'd say, a first mall, because you could go out of the front store, which was a clothing store, right through the back of the clothing store into the feed store without going outside, which was different in them days, but it was on the sort of a principle of a mall. Then in the back of that store, at one time, Louis Gibault had a shoe store, not in this part, but in the addition parts that were added to it. Louis Gibault had a shoe store. Charles Langlois had a radio shop in the back. Laundry's Cash Bazaar was at the front, which is this. Then Pearls, of course, was in that same part. And after that was Ben Franklin's, all in that front part. Upstairs there was apartments, and Jefferson's IGA was in the back for years, and the Jeffersons lived upstairs at the back. There was a Dr. Trotter that had an apartment facing Lake Street up there over the Pearl store, and one time no one knew what happened. The patients came to go to the doctors and the door was locked, and everyone waited around, and finally someone come and he had shot himself. He was dead up in the top of the store.
We'll take a short break, not to be facetious, but we're at the Peg Barcomb Museum of the Village of Rouses Point, and we're showing you memorabilia. Be right back. Okay, we're back and looking at the Bowron block, it says in the back of this picture.
Yeah, and
that's the Myers building.
That was 1909. The decorations were for the tercentenary of Samuel Champlain, and so it's really everybody decorated there, way up to the roofs.
You notice the awnings too, huh? The awning, and the street had flags over the top of the street. And here's one I just noticed, and I didn't have any idea where this was.
Now, that was the Grand Union. They were over where Jackie's Ceramics is. The Grand Union was in that big building. And then they were in this one, which was, now is Entail's Restaurant. Well, was, it's just been sold again.
You know, that's what? I used to the Ye Old
Cafe.
The sign just went
up a couple days ago. She put her sign up. But this was the Grand Union, when they went there until they built where they are today. But that's
They were here, right? They left from here to went to where they are. Oh yeah, well, then I must remember it. I just don't seem to recall. And now this I can't place.
Well, that's the snow. But that first building, that City Drug, is right where Harrison's is today. And the second building is where Ray's Appliance is.
All right.
I see that. The first building that was there was the post office, and that went on Rose Avenue, and then this City Pharmacy was the second building in that spot.
And those stairways go up, I guess, that's Joe McDonough's apartment, right?
Yes, that's Ray's Supply, yeah.
And here's that, this is the famous building.
Now, this is Union Free Academy.
In Rouses Point.
Now, if you show both of them at the same time, because we got some, now you see, one of them had thought that was the first year of the school, but now in one of those pictures, there's no bell. And there's another place, there's one telephone pole. Now, when they opened the school, there was no electricity on Maple Street. So they ran a line from Lake Street up to that school and put one pole. So that was the only power that was up there, was that, and one's got sidewalk and one doesn't.
Okay.
So it's just, to tell which is the year, it's...
So Peg, you mentioned back that Maple Street wasn't there. Now, what did you mean by that?
Well, there was no street.
Not at all?
No. Maple Street wasn't laid out that many years ago. The first of it started at the other end, and it was laid out to Washington Avenue. Then Washington Avenue through to Champlain Street was another section.
Done afterward, right? So those streets went continually. I think I have pictures of 1869, and it stopped, I think, at...
and the house that is on the southwest corner of Washington Avenue was right in the middle of what is Maple Street today. The Bennett House, we call it. I don't know who lives there. Anyway, it was the Bennett House. Well, that house was right in the center, and when they made Maple Street, they just pushed it over and put it around that corner on the side there. But that was right, and when they moved Eagle Hall, there was no street. They just went in through there.
There's the Rouses Point High School after the original building was sold, right?
Now, that was around 1920, in the 20s, that school was built. There was 8 grades in the high school in there. And my father worked for Bill Mumley, who did all the cement work for the school. He did all the cement work for the Alberg School. My father worked on that, too. And I was small. I can just barely remember. My mother would put me in a stroller, and she'd bring my father his lunch at noon, and we'd sit across the road where Dupra, his first name, Fred Dupra, where he is now. There was great big poplar trees, and we'd sit there, and my father would come over and eat his lunch under the tree, and then we'd go back home. But I can just barely remember that, so that was quite some time ago.
The big thing I remember about this school, the auditorium in the front right here, the gymnasium, of course it had not a track, but it had a balcony around 3 sides, the north, south, and the east side, and that's been taken down since. And we weren't jumping jacks like they are today. Today, these people would have a lot of concussions hitting their head because it was probably 3 feet out over the edge of the court, as I recall, and some great games, had some great times in there over there. And one more thing I wonder why you got this in my hand. The reason that these were called penny postcards back then, remember they were called penny, is because it cost a penny. And the back it says, place 1 cent stamp right there. Today it's 15 cents or you're not going to get it on its way. Penny postcards.
And that auditorium, we were never allowed to go in there with our shoes on. Skip Hill, I don't remember his first name. To us, he was Mr. Hill, but he was called Skip Hill. When we went to go in there to eat our lunch or anything, we left our shoes right at the door and walked in our stockings. He kept that floor so beautiful. And when you'd go there later and you'd see black marks and see them walk with all their different shoes, you know, it just wasn't the same. But he took pride in that school.
See, he did two things. First of all, you didn't make marks, and when you went around with your stocking feet, you helped to polish it, right? Yeah, there's a commencement of 1942, a program from the school that's up here, and here's another one of 1941. The class of 41, of course, that was 50 years last year. President was Douglas Fulton, and Vice President Viola May Jock. And I don't know if you know who that is, Calvin, but that's Foxy's mother, Viola May Jock Gagnon. Betty Virginia Pratt was secretary, and Raymond Stephen Gagnon, Foxy's father, was the treasurer. And that vice president and treasurer married later on. And Octave Béchard, Ralph Béchard, Paul Schweenyor, Roland Como, Myron Dagenhart from Champlain here, Kenneth Derrick, Charles Duffy, Rainey Duquette, Douglas Fulton, Raymond Gagnon, Edward Gallagher, Ed Gallagher, Lawrence LaFontaine, Harry Landry, Paul Letourneau, Glenn Nutt, Bernard Seshagram, William Thompson, Willie Valenzi, Eileen Kaysen, Viola Jock, Beatrice Lewis, Betty Pratt, Wanda Trainer, and Laureen Yell. Names that we've learned to know and love over the years. Presentation of diplomas, W.W. Geddes, the W.W. Geddes Electric Company. Memories that we should, the Reverend William C. Watson, benediction, many, many years from Moores, and did a lot for Moores, too. Memories of Rouses Point. You look at these very often, Peg?
No.
No. But they bring back a lot of nice memories, don't they?
Yes.
Bad memories once in a while, too?
Oh, sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah. But, you know, when you have that much, in your mind, something will come to you and you'll say, I know I got it. But then you have to find it.
You have that problem, too?
But I know if I have it. Now, that is just a receipt. And that was for the school tax. And in the whole district, the whole school tax was $400.
For all the school districts.
And you see the three men that signed it, Dr. Newton and Charles Randall and David White.
Board of Education.
Yeah, and that was 1890.
District number 5.
District 5 collected $400. That was the tax for the whole district. So that was all of Rouses Point.
There were 15 or 16 districts back then in the various schools. This was 1890. Yeah. And now this is something that is history for our area.
That, of course, there used to be a lot of tugs that came in, pulling barges, and this one was a favorite. The men that owned that kept it sparkling all the time. And I mentioned before that beautiful eagle on there. Mm-hmm. But this was just one of the many tugs. There was a Defender and different ones that came in here, but this one here was in particular.
We're not making much progress on doing our story on the barges that were made here in Champlain, New York. I can't seem to get an awful lot of information. Still working on it. It's one of the things I've spent as much time as any, and I'm still not making very much progress. We'd love to do it because it's a landmark for Champlain.
Yes. Now this is a picture I borrowed from John Ross. He told me this was called a pin flat, which I didn't know. They used these sails if there was wind. If there was no wind, they went up with a tug. A tug pulled them. But they paid. So if the wind come up, they could unhook and use their sails. But if the wind went down, they were stuck.
Just so that we don't think you still have things for John Ross that haven't been returned. When you say you borrowed the original?
Oh, yes.
And
yes.
This is a copy. This is not John Ross.
No.
So don't think it should be in the collection over there.
No, he loaned me what I didn't have of his pictures and postcards. He was nice enough. He loaned them to me, and I copied them. Yeah.
A real collector, don't just keep it for themselves. They like to see it out there, and I like the idea that somebody else wants it too.
No, if it wasn't for people loaning me pictures, I wouldn't have anything like this. But everyone has been very, very kind and let me borrow their pictures and have them copied and return them. This is just to throw it in. It's a thrift book that you got at the post office, and this belonged to my mother, and it was 1918, and you bought these stamps, and you put the stamps in, and when you got the stamps, when you got it filled with the stamps, then was like we got the bonds in the Second War when you bought a $1875 bond and it matured for $25. Well, this was sort of the same thing, only it was only stamps. And you filled your book, and then by 1923 you had to turn it in.
And you'd get $5.
And you got your $5. But that's something, there's not many left around of those.
Today you have to start saving with a $5 bill. You can't just save with dimes, but...
Now this is a couple of long gone buildings too. Now this was up on Pratt Street, and it was the railroad offices of several railroads. In our video I named the railroads, but I don't have it today. But D&H was one of them, of course. Then they moved out and they went to the Delaware House, the railroads did, and the immigration used that. And when you came from Canada, you came down 276 towards Pratt Street, and you stopped there for immigration, and then you came on down to Myers Building for customs. You had to stop 2 places. Yeah. And that is some of the immigrations that is in front there. Immigration officers, they had motorcycles. And that's...
Yeah, notice the narrow tires on those.
Now this was the Railway Express office. That is still there.
Just to the north of the
north of the D&H station. Now Jim Cronkite, they gave contract to deliver the express, and Jim Cronkite was one of the last men. They used to with horse when this picture was taken, but he was one of the last men with a little truck, and he delivered the packages for the Railroad Express. It was let out by contract. Now Jim Cronkite was Bob Cronkite's father.
Okay, well, we're talking about the Cronkites. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back. You're watching What's Going On Here. Hometown Cable. It's on every Sunday night. Hope you stay tuned and tune in every Sunday night, Sunday afternoon, and early Monday morning. It's on at 1:30 on Sunday, 1:15, 4:30, 8 p.m., midnight, and at 8 on Monday morning. And shows like this, talking with people, history of our area, and we're very fortunate today to be talking with Peg Barcomb. And we're going to come back and hear more of what Peg has to say, because she's got a lot to tell us. All right, we're looking at the freight office again.
Now, to continue with that, we told you about the express office and Jim Cronkite delivering the packages with his truck. Now, then that building now belongs to Derringers. Derringers are not using it, but I heard through the grapevine that CP is already talked of renting this. The rumor is that the station is going to be knocked down, the old D&H station, and when they do, CP is going to rent this building to use for offices and a station, so it still may get used again. But I've got people out watching. If they start to demolish the station, I'll be up there.
You want to be there, absolutely.
Oh, Canadian Pacific that has bought the D&H.
D&H,
and
yeah.
Of course they're getting rid of every building to save taxes that they don't really need, and they feel the station is in such bad shape anyway that if they probably could get rid of it and knock it down, they'll save taxes.
It's a historical, the historical building that's been there a number of years.
Yes, but the way it is now, it's probably not worth trying to save.
Right.
So. Now this is Hoig's Meat Market. Now this is just north of the liquor store, West Liquor Store on Lake Street in Rouses Point.
Just north of the liquor store?
Yes, just north. It's Teddy Sweet's Moffat, Ken Moffat's house, whose wife was Teddy Sweet. Now, there's a story behind that meat market. Before I tell you the story, this is the inside of the meat market. And that's Frank Favreau on this side.
Be on the left as you look at it?
Yeah. Frank Favreau is Colleen Freeney's father. And Mr. Hoig is on the other side. But that's a real nice old meat market. And the chopping blocks are great. If somebody could find one of those today. But
you know, Colleen
Freeney.
Frenier, yes, to the Favreau. related to my wife. I think my mother-in-law and she are cousins. They were much closer than I thought. I came across that recently and checking.
Colleen and I and her husband Everest were all in school in the same room. We all were in school together.
Well, that must have been a noisy room.
It was.
Is that a noisy room, huh?
Yeah, it was.
Was that when because you went to school at the Anchorage for a while, you said, right?
Only for one class. We went down there just for one class while they were building the school.
The Anchorage building, when they were working from one to the other, yep.
Now, the story about this meat market, Henry Sebring had a meat market in the house that is south of Entale's restaurant. Roberts lived there today. Well, Henry Sebring had a meat market there in the cellar, and Carrie Mandigo was a Sebring. That was her father. She was at Mrs. Loware's, who had another store down on State Street, and Mrs. Loware gave her some money to go to the store and get some meat. And instead of going to her father's meat market, she went to Hoig's meat market to buy the meat. And when her father found out, he asked her why, and she said, well, it was cheaper. She told me that story herself.
You know, that building you're talking about, the Roberts building, I wonder if that stone that they recently dug out next to the...
I think that was a case. I went and saw that and all and took pictures of it. She called me. I think that was a case of like it was at Mrs. Burnham's and the stone that is up near Thurber Inn on the ground. Dick Collins showed me that one. When they moved the bodies, a lot of those stones, they bought new stones, and they were just left. And so the stones were just, you know, some use them for doorstops and doorsteps, and I don't believe it had anything to do with a body at all, because right next to the Roberts, that empty lot, there was a building there. It ended up as Musso's Pharmacy, and it burned. That was the Luck building, and it was there for years. And they had a cemetery, and the cemetery was up Washington Avenue, almost to the corner of Maple and Washington. So there would have been no reason to have a stone down there. That wasn't where the cemetery was.
What we're talking about, if you don't recognize yet, they when they were digging up for the street, they found what would be a gravestone standing upright, correct? Right in front of the door of that Roberts house next to Ankle Restaurant.
Well, it was all in pieces.
It wasn't broken up. They wanted to give it to the village. Now, getting back to this picture here, if you're still on your screen of the store, back in those days and up until the 30s and 40s, you didn't go in and pick up your own piece of your own canned goods. You asked the storekeeper for every piece, right? And he took it down from the counters and put it on and he set up your order. It wasn't one of these as today where you wait on yourself. And you'll notice the hanging light in that picture. Great picture. Great picture.
The background in pictures is almost as interesting as the picture itself.
You could talk for half an hour on this picture.
To look at the old fixtures and so on that are in them.
Yep.
But I didn't know who that man was either. Well, I showed that picture to Colleen Frenier, and she's the one who told me, well, that's my father.
Now, this picture right here is very...
now, that's a fish story.
Well, this is a very interesting story.
Now, that picture, that's George McChesney and George Lincoln Penfield. Again, on the left is George McChesney.
McChesney on the left?
Yeah. And George Lincoln Penfield. I showed this picture to Mary Ann Trombley in the library, and she said, that's my grandfather. So Mr. Penfield was Mary Ann's grandfather. She also told me he was a trustee in the Village of Rouses Point in 1915. So that was a kind of a nice picture. That's taken out in back of, well, across from Ralph's Park, down on the lakeshore right there. Being back of Marnes's Inn.
On the back of this picture, I noticed it says Bill Corcoran's house with stairs in the back, way in the back.
Are you holding it without a glare?
I think he's already got it frozen on. I think you, Calvin, was that frozen on?
Yeah, with the stairs is Bill Corcoran's. When I find out these things, I try to add a little bit
I see you have these written on the back. It's a good idea because otherwise there'd be no way of knowing. It's right down the shore of the lake. And
now you see, it wasn't a fish story because there's their fish.
Yes, so look at the size of those.
Now, I don't know who the little boy is, but it's in the same position and the same men, so they weren't making up a fish story.
In the middle picture, it says on here you don't know who that is, and the brick building in the background in the center is Pearls, or what is now the furniture store, right?
Kathy's Furniture.
Cassie's Furniture
Yes.
is where you're located?
That building was built in 1889.
103
That was a
years old.
Slingsby block.
Great old pictures.
Now this is Montgomery Street. I like that picture.
That's the one goes down along the water.
Now that's a picture that Marion Bernard gave me. That's Cy Bernard's mother, James Bernard's mother. The steps you see are the steps of the lake house, which I've got a picture of that later. But this would have been west of the state dock and east of Sportsman's. Would have been right in between there. And they're getting wood out of the water washes up on shore, and they get the wood for their winter.
Now, as I look at this, I see that railway car. That's that railway.
That's on Sportsman's.
Oh, that's, I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon.
The tracks went out on the end of
Okay,
Sportsman's.
that's where the hotel
Now
had
show
that.
that one again.
Okay, he's still got it on screen.
Okay. The small house in that picture could be Jacques Rouse's. When they decided to build a fort, they took Jacques' land away from him that he had out on Island Point. And he came in that area and built a small house for the rest of his days. He was old then, and we think that might be. Now the bigger house, Mrs. Bernard told me that was moved up on Church Street and is still there.
Rouses Point had quite a few houses that were moved,
Yes,
right?
yes. People used to move them around.
Rouses Point of old.
Now this is a picture that just about everybody Rouses Pointer has seen or has, 1860. Now the saloon is where, well, we say entails, restaurant. The bakery was Bertrand's, which is now the video store. Upstairs over that was always a barber shop. There was one barber after another, always had shops up there. And then the last shop up there was Margaret Landry had a beauty shop upstairs over that store. And in the back of the building was there was always apartments up in the top of that. Then the meat market, Joe Laundry had a meat market in the cellar, that next house, in there. And above him on the first floor, Miss LaValle, who was Joe Laundry's sister, had a candy store. Now that building is Harold Laundry's, and it hasn't changed a bit.
Which one is that then, Peg? That's
With the two porches.
okay. So that was State Street was not there.
Not yet.
Oh.
We're not to State Street yet.
Oh, okay.
So then next to Harold Laundry, on the corner, was another building, which has burned since. Now, Clyde Lemoy had half of that as a novelty store. He sold all sort of little novelty things, and he was the local florist, and he ran a taxi. So he was jack of all trades. On the other half of it, there was a shoemaker. Pete Goverill had a shoemaker shop there. And Pete Goverill was the brother of one that owned the Holland House. And the last people in there was Will Laundry had a cigar store, and then Geraldine Laundry ran it as a liquor store. And then it burned. And that would have been right on the corner of State and Lake. Then if you'll go across the lake, you're back to the Thompson store, which was now the Myers building. And the last building is the Massachusetts house, which they moved.
You know, as you look at these pictures, you're thinking of 1860. Obviously, nothing here is like it was then. And here we are in 1990, and in 2080, they're going to be talking about things that we know very well and that will be gone or changed by then. Things changing all the time, and that's why it's so important to keep these old pictures and have them and find out what they are. You know, if you found this picture in a sale or in Malone or in Plattsburgh, if it didn't say Rouses Point down below, you wouldn't know where it is.
No.
So it's very important to have identification on these pictures. We're still at the Knight Columbus building in Champlain, New York, and we're talking with Peg Barcomb on our program called What's Going On Here. Hope you're enjoying this reminiscing of Rouses Point, memorabilia, pictures, and so forth with Peg. And please stand by. We'll be right back. This building, as you see it now, looks like an orphan here, but it's not really that alone, is it, Peg?
No, this was the Webb and Roden store. It was built in 1818, and the boats came right up to the back of it. The lake come right up to it. There was no land or nothing back there. And they would unload the boats right there at the back of the store up to the second floor. And yet today, there's a great big wooden wheel. It must be at least 6 feet high. And they'd work that wheel on a cable and hoist the things out of the boat to the second floor. And they would be brought in the second floor. Then when the merchants bought the stuff, it was taken out the front door of the second floor. You see in the front, there's a door on the second floor. And that's how they would bring their things out. But during that time, the fort was going on. They were building the fort. And so there was a lot of people around. So they had a real big business. They had 25 employees.
In this store?
For that store. Some delivered, some unloaded, some waited on people, and so you see the whole thing was being used, but it wasn't people just sitting in the store. They'd go out and deliver, and so there was 25. Then Roden left, and it was Webb and Crook. And then Crook moved downtown, and when he moved downtown, he had the building north of Shambo's Insurance. Right now. He was north of that building. New Channels was in that building until they moved. Well, that building was the Crook store. And then when the railroad came, this big store closed down because the business then was downtown.
It must be awful to have a store and your name is Crook. Let's go to Crook's store. That's got to be tough.
He was also the bank manager in
He
Champlain.
You know, well, you better tell people where this building is, Peg, about this time.
So that building is right at the end of Champlain Street. If you came down Route 11, it's right there in front of you, at the end of Champlain Street.
Right next to the Log Cabin Motel. You run right straight into it.
Yep.
And I think we talked about this building when we were on the railroad. We did the Saxony.
Yes.
And when we were on the roof of the Saxony, we took pictures over the top of this. And one thought was, what a great place for the museum would be.
I've always said that would be my choice. No, my choice would be if they could buy it, rent the downstairs, and have the museum upstairs, and the rent would pay the upkeep.
You'd have a view out onto that lake.
That's always been my dream, but we'll probably never see it.
Not much of an area.
That's what I would like to see.
It'd be tough for parking maybe in that area, but
no, there's quite a bit of parking.
Yeah?
Yeah.
There's not as a gas station off to the north.
Yes, but that is not much. It could come down and make all parking. So
nice old building.
Then after the Crooks and Webb got out, it was LaValle had a grocery store there, and he'd come around to your house and get your grocery order in the morning, and then he'd come back in the afternoon and deliver it because not many people had telephones. Then after him, it was Ellick Laundry, and he had a pool hall in there, and he sold gasoline. He had a gasoline pump. And then it was closed for a long, long time, and then the Jarvis boys opened it as a laundromat, and that didn't last too long. And then Ellick Laundry ran it one more year as young Ellick as a laundromat, and then that was it.
You know, years ago, Bob Musso from Chazy bought a back bar. Great big back bar. And I think it was stored in that building.
It was.
It was, huh?
Yes.
Was it ever used in that building?
No.
No. It was just stored there, right?
Stored there.
It was a great big, did you ever see that, Carl? I don't know if it was a great big.
They
it must
took
have been,
it out through that second story window, door in the front.
It must have been 20 feet across. And a great big back bar and a big bar itself come out of a...
It came out of the laundry saloon down on State Street.
Yeah, beautiful thing. I don't know if he still has that at Chazy upstairs or not. Are you all done with that? Whatever.
Yeah.
Right now, this is a picture.
The circus is coming.
Festive time in Rouses Point.
That was the circus parade. When the circus would come, they'd have a parade. They'd use the elephants and everything and parade up and down the streets.
Where is this? Where is this located? What building is that we're looking at there?
I'd have to look at it.
Okay.
That's Jackie's Ceramics today, and this is the one right next to Rouse Park.
Okay,
and there's the village office you can see.
So Washington.
Oh no, you got to come.
You got to come up further. So there was open space in here.
Yeah, Kenyon Block wasn't there, but Eagle Hall was already gone.
And way down on the left, you can see over the top of the other horses, That's down near where the village...
That is what was the fire department building, and Vic West moved it a bit north and made apartments.
Okay.
That's still there.
Great picture. And then, again, Circus Day in Rouses Point with the elephants.
We used to have nice circuses. They really for a place, but you know why we got good circuses? They'd come and they'd be on their way to Canada, to Montreal, and while they waited for their clearance, they'd set up in little towns to make some money in the meantime.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother used to make the gowns for the girls that were the trapeze artists. They'd come over if they needed them sewed or needed one made. She did their sewing.
And of course, one of the reasons why Rouses Point was so well known and so popular, and there was people coming back and forth, was because of buildings like this right here, the railroad, right?
Now that is the brick railroad station. It was built by the Rutland in 1886. They built that station. Now this other one is the same station, but you got a little more in it. Now the water tank in that picture belonged to the railroad, and in, I think it was 1901, the village told them they either had to take it down or move it because it was too close to Lake Street. It was dangerous. So they weren't using it, so they took it down. They didn't use it. And in the milk cans you see
I was going to
sitting at
mention
the
that.
end,
Go ahead.
that was waiting for the milk train. The farmers would bring their milk to the station and wait, and when the milk train come in, well then they'd load them all on the train and headed to Boston.
Yeah, it wasn't always bulk milk. You know, those cans in the front had to be put into a cement vat they had in the milk room where you kept ice. You had to get your ice out of your ice house, put it in, and you have to lift these cans up out of the water that was in there. And remember, they were heavy. They weighed 80 pounds plus a piece. 80 pounds of milk, I guess, plus the can. And then when you pulled it out, you got your front of your body, your clothes all wet as you moved them around. It wasn't easy, in the winter particularly.
In the background, to the right, you can see the storage tanks of the Standard Oil Company. Now, they were in where Delagar's is.
Okay, yes.
They were, where Delagar's is where Standard Oil was, and they had about 5 of these great big tanks, just like you see going into Plattsburgh.
This is an east-west, of course, the Rutland. And then right ahead of that tank you see is Lake Street. Lake Street crossed right there, correct?
Before the tank.
Before that,
Between the station and the tank was the Lake Street.
Little park here in front of the railroad station on...
Oh yeah, that's the D&H station, and that's the second one. The first one burned down, and they built this one, and they had a little park there with a cannon in the little park. That's the one that, if CP has their way, is going to come down.
When you look, when you look at these, Peg, it's kind of too bad how things deteriorate and go. The car, I guess, is having us travel all so much.
Yeah.
And
but there again, we got the railroad videos, so if they want more information on the videos, they can
exactly
get the videos
now,
to see the rest of it.
Here's that famous place we heard about before when we were talking railroads.
Now this is the Massachusetts house, and they're holding an auction because F.W. Myers had bought the land. Now this building was where F.W. Myers' building is next to the Grand Union, not the one across from the Holland, but their big
main
office
building. That's where that was located.
This is where the Massachusetts house was. Now that house was brought across with rollers and things like that from Hemingford, that Massachusetts house, by a Mrs. Russell. All we know her name was Mrs. Russell. She set that up there and had a Massachusetts house. She built Harold Laundrie's house. She built the A house, which we'll show later. And when this house was, they had the auction, sold the stuff, they took that building and they moved it back through over to where, on State Street, to where Dr. Sclair had his house. And they set it up there, and then it ran as this, as the Arlington.
Now that's a 4-story building, and if you look at the picture way off to the right, you see some buildings way off. That's about where the fire station is that correct, way over here?
No, that's Dr. Letourneau's house.
Yeah, but way further would
be,
in the area would be...
well, I think it'd be hid.
It would be off to that, that's the area.
Yeah.
Pratt Street would go in front of that White House on the right, okay?
Yes.
And this...
That's the Arlington. That was the Massachusetts house, and after they moved it, they called it the Arlington, and May Casavaugh, Stephen May Casavaugh ran it. And that burned. It burned in 1934.
If it weren't for fire...
My father took the rest of that down after it burned, and here about a month ago we got talking about it, and he explained to me how he took that building down, how he cut the corners and let it fall on the inside one story at a time, and that's how he took it down after it had burned.
They were well done. It was 1910. That's 80 years ago. You didn't always have cars.
Now this is just, this fellow was coming around with the Clinton County Fair posters and leaving them at business places and all. So he had come from Plattsburgh, and that's how they delivered them.
You know, when we were talking about the fair down in Plattsburgh with Bill LePage, it was brought up, I think, in a conversation that the first fair in the county was here in Champlain, New York.
It was.
Right?
Yeah. I've got a little story on that, as to what they did and how much they gave for awards and all this sort of thing.
All kinds of little things up in northeastern New York State here. And here's a picture 120 years old, and I don't know the location of this.
That's
exactly.
Montgomery Street, again.
See the water.
The house with the chimney, this one, is the Bernard House. That would be just past Earl Merchant's, this one.
Mm-hmm.
So you're right on the curve of this is Sportsman's. And your railroad bridge is out
Montgomery,
here, see?
Montgomery, yes.
Yeah. That's just before you get to Sportsman's.
Yeah.
Would really be the best way to describe it.
So different, so different.
Now, Mike Holland built the Holland Hotel. That was the first Holland Hotel in 1872.
Or what's left of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that was the burning. This is the whole, we don't have one of the first
Okay.
before it burned. Then it burned. Then this second one is when they rebuilt it in 1877 after it burned. And then they rebuilt it after it reburned second time. They rebuilt it the way it is now.
And this
That's the second one.
not this one.
And this is the third one.
Just a minute. I thought this was more the Marnes Inn, no?
No,
that's
no,
the Holland.
that's the Holland.
There was that big of a porch on the
Compare
side.
your windows with the one you just had in your hand.
Oh, and the porch. Then it burned again.
Burned again.
I beg your pardon. Okay, all right. Okay, and then
Now this was building it the third time, the way it is today.
after the 1920 fire.
Yeah. And then this is another view of it, more like it is today, after they put all this brick part on. So they took off the porches burned and all that.
Mhm.
So the only original is this back part, where the bar is today. That's the original part of it.
You know, the pictures of the old cars.
No.
Now this is the tower we could see in the picture when they were walking with the lady on the horse. And when I asked you what's in the background, there's that
No.
chimney. Isn't
No.
that the chimney?
No, not what
No?
you saw with the lady and the lady and the horse was near where Chauvin's is. This is Liberty Street. This is the water standpipe. Now that little house in that picture is still there. It's just west of the KC building.
All right, well, while we're looking here, I'm looking to see what I thought was the tower in this picture.
What you saw was the Rutland Water Tower, the same one you saw in the station picture.
I guess I'm back too far here. I'll have to dig this out. See this picture right here. See that tower?
Yeah.
That must be the one on Liberty? The chimney?
That's the village office.
But they had a big chimney there separate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But that wasn't this. This
Okay.
is the water tower.
Oh, that's the water tower.
That's the water tower. That
Okay.
was our village water. And that little house is right west, it's still there, it's right west of the KC on Liberty Street.
Oh, yes, that's been sold, it's been redone.
Yes, yes. Now this is another picture of it. It shows, to the right is St. Patrick's Convent in that one. And that pipe came down in 1901, that they took that water pipe down. But that gives you an idea of the size, looking at it there. And this is when it was down and laying in the street. Now, the village had hired some professional people to take that pipe down, and of course, there was houses on both sides of the street, and you had to know what you were doing. And this Fred Blair, he was like a jack of all trades, and he was going by there one day, and the men are measuring and figuring and all, and he said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Well, the village has hired us to take this water pipe down, and standpipe." And they were trying to figure how they were going to do it, and he says, "For $50, I'll take it down for you." And the village had given them $500. He went home, he got some saws and some equipment, just hand stuff. And he come back, he started sawing the legs and sawing them at a certain amount and move around, saw them again, and that landed right exactly in the middle of the street, right where he wanted it. And he took it down alone.
Yeah. You see, now this, if you think this is a photograph or a picture, it's not. It's a postcard. It's on the back of a postcard. It was a memorable time, and they wanted to have, and people bought these things, and you probably got this from one of your friends along the way.
One of the collectors.
One of the collectors knew that it was Rouses Point.
And you see, if it's a photo, like that is, if it's a photo postcard, it costs more than if it's just a regular postcard.
Right. Now there's the school back there, right? That's the convent?
Yeah, that's the convent.
You can see the convent back here with the tower, or the bell, rather. And
now, in that... well, before we get to that
okay.
one, where the KC building is today, there was a clay pipe factory. They made clay pipes. Now, Harold Miro, that you know, has got one of those pipes. When we were kids, we used to go scrounge around and find pieces of the clay pipes.
You mean smoking pipe, right?
Smoking pipes. Now, in my records at the town office is the whole history of that factory. How they made it, where they got the sand. They had to get the sand from England because it was a special kind of sand that they had to use. And the whole history of it is in there. Then there's some fella in the United States, I don't even remember his name, but that history is there too. He did a whole book on clay pipe factories in the United States. So I furnished him with all the information that I had, and he came here and he wanted to dig at the KC to see if he could find any parts. And Mary Obry, who was living then on Rose Avenue, had lived on Maple Street. And she knew about that building. So I called her and I said, "Can you pinpoint about where it was?" She says, "Go over there, and the front door of the KC is right even with the front door that building was." He went over, he got permission to dig, and he dug a few holes, and he found some clay pipe. So he put it in his book. So we're in that book too. It mentions Rouses Point because that was something else that was there. And then after that clay pipe factory went out, that was apartments. And then I don't know if that building burned or if they took it down, but there was apartments there. Now this is just Main Street. Again, the building on your right is where Jackie's Ceramics is. Was a hardware store.
Indicates here 1893.
Yeah, it's just a nice old Main Street.
And seeing that's nearly, roughly close to 100 years ago, we'll take a short break here. 100 years is a long time to go, and we'll be right back. Bob Venn, what's going on here? Talking with Peg Barcomb, our guest today, and very, very interesting. We've been here for 3 or 4 hours, and still very interesting. Of course, you see a lot of water in these pictures because Rouses Point is on the water, and which helped make, between the trains and the water, Rouses Point grew and had many more people, I guess, years ago than it has now.
No, just about the
about
same.
The same?
Yeah. There's not that many different from 1860 as to what there is now by the census.
And we're looking at some boats here, canal boats.
This is the canal boats, and they're tied up to the east side of Sportsman's Dock. They stayed there all winter, and they had loads of coal, and people would go down and buy their coal right off the barges, right off those boats for the winter use them.
You can see the living area was that part that's up higher. There was one or two rooms on that boat, on the canal boat, and some of the families from Champlain used to get on the canal boat and run it all summer, come back in the fall, go back to their home. The children lived on there all. I was told that there were about 20 by 20, I guess, the living quarter on the boat.
They were different. Each boat was different. And in the winter, what they would do, they would put straw. As soon as the ice would start to come in, before it got too thick, they'd put bales of straw all around the canal boat so that it wouldn't be froze in.
Yeah, that's interesting because I was told by Skip Sachs down in the lake, he runs pipes out into the lake for his water. And what he does, as soon as the ice comes in, he puts bales of straw on top of the ice over the pipes. You know, they're underneath a foot or two, and they don't freeze down because frost starts in the top and goes down, and that protects it from freezing around it.
Well, the ice would buckle the boats.
Yes?
If you didn't have something
Yeah.
there. So the bale would be just enough to keep it from freezing enough they wouldn't buckle the boat.
We're looking at a picture of winter here, Peg.
Yeah, that's snow on Main Street. Now, those men are standing very near in front of Harold Laundrie's house. Now, those men are left to right, Clarence Rosemeyer, Harry Brousseau, Dr. Newton, Bernard Saborn, and Alec Dan.
Doctor that you mentioned, was he a medical doctor?
He was a druggist.
A druggist, all right.
Yeah.
And here's another one, probably putting you in the same place.
Yeah, very much the same place, only it's just some more snow.
Again, postcard. You know, not a photograph, a postcard. On the back it says postcard.
Yeah.
Big piles of snow, and of course they didn't move the snow away during the winter back then. They didn't have
Well, they packed it down.
They packed it down, you kept putting it there, and you pile it up. Now they move it away and wait for the next storm.
They have horses with big rollers behind that would go up and down and pack it. And the rollers that pack the snow, and they'd leave it right there.
Of course, there weren't any trucks going by in the village going at 30, 35 miles an hour.
Now, this building was on Maple Street. Of course, I can't tell you where it is now because it's covered over, but it was at that time. The school would have been just to the left, the old academy. This building was right next to the academy, north of the
So it's
academy.
been torn down long ago. No.
That building belonged to this Fred Belair that took down the water pipe, and that's my father-in-law in the buggy. When Eris bought that, he bought this piece of land too, and they sold that house to Dave Brothers for $1 for moving it. He moved it to Maple Street, but they found out when they got into it, it was a log house, and it really cost them a mint to get that thing moved. I'm not sure who lives in that house now. I think it's Dupraw, but I'm not Pat Dupraw, but I'm not positive if it is. But that's the same house. Now that was Eris, the school, and they remodeled it a bit, took off the steeple and so on when Eris started to use it.
The old high school, 1937.
Yeah.
And of course, it was, I forget the man's name, that asked him to look at the Rouses Point. You
Mr.
remember?
Delano.
Delano asked him to, they wanted to come down. They were going to go down south of here, and he told them to stop in Rouses Point, and they had some property here, and they'd like to have them settle here. And he saw this building, and they made arrangements to buy it, and it was, since then it's history. One of the biggest employers in the county.
And this is where they were knocking it down, the original school.
And those didn't fall down. You had to really knock them down. They were put up to stay.
That
They
really
weren't.
came down.
I think one of the most interesting things I heard today are those two buildings on Pratt Street that they tore down. They didn't burn down. You know, those
They took
big
them
buildings
down.
you talked about.
Yeah.
All right?
Now, that was the 50th anniversary of Eris. And I went to open house, and the lady, I said, do you think Mr. Weatherhahn would come for a picture? He wasn't in the room. And she says, you can't have a camera in here. And I said, well, I'm not going to take pictures in here, just in the office. So she went, and he said, well, sure. So he came out, and Paul Clothier was the mayor.
Mm-hmm.
So Mr. Weatherhahn suggested we get under the sign, and so we did, and took the picture.
Very colorful here. It's too bad he didn't have a blue suit on. You had the red, white, and blue there.
So that is the book that they gave us at the 50th anniversary of Eris. It has all the progress and the pictures. Now you see that there's probably not too many people kept them, but everybody that went in was given one.
And those that kept them don't know where they are.
No, but it's a very good history, and it tells how they started, and so you don't have to put it back.
Okay.
Now that was Standard Oil Company from where I showed you the big tanks. This is how they used to deliver to the house. Now that's Arthur Kuchar, and that's in front of Marnes's Inn, across from Ralph's Park. And he was out delivering the oil.
Kept your furnace going.
Yeah.
Uh,
Now that was T.M. Leonard's house. That was
Beautiful picture.
Some Canadian lives there now. I don't know his name,
Now, where is...
but it's this house today.
Oh, it is?
People will know. It's not the same house, but it's the same spot. The big one, the old house, belonged to T.M. Leonard. That was his home. And when Harry T. Leonard, the son, after the old people died, his wife didn't like that old house, so he built this new one at the top.
It's on Lake Street. That lastly I knew of was Bill Harris, right?
I don't know.
Was living there.
It's some Montreal man that has it now, but I don't know what their name is. But when they built that, they called it the $1 Million Bungalow because it had all very expensive fixtures and all that stuff in it.
I don't know if that picture is still on the camera, the big one. You notice the carriage house to the left here, all the way back.
That carriage house is out on Point Affair. Wally Willette had it as a camp. If you went on Point Affair, as soon as you got to the lake, if you went right straight, when you got to the lake, it would have been right on your right.
Very impressive house. And of course, here's a common scene of years ago, going across the famous Rutland Bridge.
Oh yes, that is the Rutland crossing, and if it kept coming, it'd run in the Pier Restaurant today, because it's the Pier Restaurant sitting right where the tracks would have been.
Mm-hmm. When we went down and done a story, we did a story with the burning of the railway bridge there, and then the Pier Restaurant. Here's a menu from the pier.
There again, you see when you collect things. I went in the Pier Restaurant when it first opened. Of course, I had loaned them railroad pictures that they had blown up and they had all around in there. So I wanted a menu, and he said, well, you know, we don't. I said, look, I loaned you the pictures. I want a menu. So he gave me the menu, and then, see, I had wrote him the history. So this was on the table map.
Yeah. Now, when we say they didn't want to give it to him, we're not talking about Howard Lamberton and his wife. That we're talking about the previous owners. Howard, I'm sure, would have said, I'll give it to you right away.
When they first opened, Corona and another man, I don't know his name.
Claude Hebert?
I don't know. I
and
talked to Corona, but...
railroad pictures in the restaurant. When you go in there, look at those pictures. Some of Shaughnessy's pictures out of Shaughnessy.
Yeah. Now, this is two sharks. They call them the Sharks. Those engines came in Rouses Point, but the men didn't like them. They used them for switch engines, and they didn't like them. They operated hard or something. So they're now in South America, but they did work Rouses Point Yard.
Mm-hmm. This is called Super Postcard, by the way. And another picture.
Now, that's John Myers' house. That house, when that was built, we didn't have any churches, and if they'd come, the visiting clergy would come, they'd let them use one of the rooms in that house to say Mass or have a Protestant service or whatever.
Elegant porches.
And then after that, Leeward Manette started a furniture store in there, but it didn't go over very good. So then it went to the nursing home until they built the new nursing home today.
Mm-hmm. Well, this looks like something that might be on State Street.
Now, that's the commercial. Harold Muro loaned me that picture. To us, that was the Alexander House, but it was a commercial when this Mrs. Russell, who built Harold Laundrie's house and all this, she built this too. We always called it the A House. The Delarmiers run it for years. Mrs. Delarmier had a restaurant, and Mr. Delarmier had the bar. And they had rooms upstairs. And that was right behind the liquor store that burned down. It's just up State Street before you get to Maple.
Mm-hmm.
That's
on the
still
left.
there.
On the
Yes.
left as you head. Still there.
Giroux, yes.
Yes.
That was the last
Yeah.
ones that were in there. And then they tried to rent it as apartments, but I guess now it's condemned.
Sid Gagne had it.
Sid had it for...
Yeah, it's condemned now, and it's there. Now, what have you got? Oh, that is Rouses Point's second bowling alley, the building on your left. The building on the right is where Paul and Dot Malloy's house is today.
Montgomery Street.
On Montgomery Street, right in front of the state dock.
Mm-hmm.
Those two houses were right in front of the state dock. And those people is Vera Murray and her sister Cora Brothers.
And right behind there, I guess, is Delagar, right?
Yes,
Behind there
yes,
is
through
would
the
be
back would be Delagar's, but that is right on Montgomery Street.
I didn't know these pictures even existed. I didn't know these buildings existed, Peg. I'm really impressed, and I'm
Now,
shocked.
that was on Washington Avenue. There was a bakery, it's still there, Benny Loire's house, and this was right across how would I say? Well, the Roberts house, and then there's an empty lot at the Roberts house where I told you the Musso drugstore was, the Luck House. Well, this would have been right up, about halfway up on the right from Lake Street was this Rushlow Monuments.
We'd like to remind you, you're watching Hometown Cable, and we're just about finished this week's segment with Peg Barcomb and the history of pictures and interesting things in and around Rouses Point. We're going to see some memorabilia in another segment, and this is the second segment. We're going to have 3 or 4 segments, and you're watching the second. We hope you had a chance to see the first. If you haven't, why don't you give Calvin a call. Maybe he can make a copy for you. $15 will make you a copy, or make you a copy of the whole thing, and you'll have it. Particularly if you're from Rouses Point, you should have this and send it to your children for their birthday or something. The history of Rouses Point. And we'd like to thank you for, again, watching Hometown Cable. What's going on here? Our Sunday night show with Calvin on the camera always, and Bob Venn here, and interesting guests like Peg Barcomb. And Peg, it's a pleasure again. And we'll be going into the next segment. And as we mentioned before, we're not going to go change our clothes, but we do change our clothes. But week to week, and we're doing it all in one segment here on the 20th of January in the Knights of Columbus building in Champlain, New York, on corner